So all this month, we have a new worship theme. It's February, which means we have a new theme we're going to be exploring all month. February's theme is inclusion. Inclusion. And today, to connect with that theme, we're going to be lifting up the teachings of Dr. Howard Thurman, one of the greatest religious figures this country has ever known. So I want to tell you a little bit about Dr. Thurman. He was born in 1899 in the Deep South, and he struggled to get an education in the intensely segregated world that he knew. But he graduated from Morehouse College. He went on to become an ordained Baptist minister of great renown. In the 1930s, he traveled to India and he met with Gandhi. Later, he served for many years as dean of the chapel at Howard University. And later, he became one of the first co-ministers of the first intentionally multiracial congregation in the United States, which was in San Francisco. It actually still exists. The Church for the Fellowship of All Peoples, founded San Francisco, 1944. Later, he went on to become one of the spiritual mentors of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and many other civil rights leaders. And so he is a towering figure among us. For Dr. Thurman, resilience and liberation began on the inside. And to show you what I mean, I want to share with you a brief passage from his autobiography. This is a passage where he is remembering his boyhood, growing up among many mentors in his church, and especially his grandmother who had been born into slavery. So these are Dr. Thurman's words. Looking back, he says, it is clear to me that the watchful attention of my sponsors in the church served to enhance my consciousness that whatever I did with my life mattered. They added to the security given to me by the quiet insistence of my mother, and especially my grandmother, that their children's lives were a precious gift. Once or twice a year, he continues, the slave master, known to his grandmother, she told this story about the times when the slave master would permit a slave preacher to come over to preach to his slaves. And this is Thurman describing how his grandmother would tell the story to these children when their spirits were starting to flag from everything they faced. The slave preacher, he said, followed a long tradition, which is to bring the sermon to a grand climax by a dramatization of the story of Jesus. At the end, he would be exhausted, but his congregation would be uplifted and sustained with courage to withstand the difficulties of the week to come. This preacher, when he had finished, would pause, his eyes scrutinizing every face in the congregation. And then he would tell them, you are not slaves, you are God's children. You are God's children. When my grandmother got to that part of her story, Dr. Thurman concludes, there would be a slight stiffening in her spine as we sucked in our breath. When she had finished, our spirits were restored. Dr. Thurman. And isn't that what we are here to do today? To remind each other that what we do with our lives matter, that we have dignity, that we are free on the inside, no matter what is happening on the outside. We are here to support each other so that we can go out and face the world with all its difficulties and opportunities with courage and resilience and grace.
Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving, ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again come, 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 whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving, ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again worshiper, lover of leaving, ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again
One more time with feeling. Come,
whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving, ours is no caravan of despair. Come yet again, yet again.
Ours is no caravan of despair. A few days ago, Bishop Marion Edgar Buddy, did you hear her? She preached directly to the president and called on him to have mercy. To have mercy on the people in our country who are scared, immigrant workers, children who fear their parents being taken away, children who are gay, lesbian, and transgender. Bishop Buddy spoke directly to him and asked him to have mercy. The world was watching. You saw her, you heard her. Afterwards, Bishop Buddy reflected that as she thought about what to say in that extraordinary moment, she was inspired by some advice from Dr. Howard Thurman to listen for what he called the sound of the genuine. The sound of the genuine, that which is real, that which is true. I was already planning to talk with you today about Dr. Thurman and why his message is still so vital. Many years after he died in 1981, I was already planning that, but now, having lived through just a few days of this new administration, I know that we need his reminder that truth is important. Listening to what we know is right is important. And it is vital that we remember his core teaching that each of us is precious, worthy, and beloved. Each of us. Dr. Thurman's favorite text in the Bible was Psalm 139. It reads in part, "For it was you, God, who formed my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made." He read this text every day of his life for decades. An affirmation of worth and dignity, that belief that you are perfect, wonderfully made. Powerful words when spoken by Dr. Thurman, by so many others like him who have struggled over a lifetime against the soul-killing effects of racism and oppression. I am wonderfully made. Powerful words when spoken by members of the LGBTQ plus community who have embraced this text as a sign that who they are is to be celebrated. I am wonderfully made. Powerful words when spoken by so many who have had to work to hold on to their dignity and their self-respect in this land of diversity and struggle and still hope. Will you say it with me? I am wonderfully made. I am wonderfully made. Dr. Thurman has a special word for all of us who are the targets of oppression and violence in this world. If that is you, he says, you must protect yourself from everything that would destroy your spirit. He says there is nothing more important than to hold fast to the knowledge of who you really are. Beloved, beautiful, wonderfully made. I want to tell you a piece of the story of how he got to that place, that position, that way of thinking and living. In 1935, as I mentioned, Thurman traveled to India, Sri Lanka, and Burma as part of a delegation of Black Christian leaders from the United States. On this trip, 1935, he met a Hindu professor from Sri Lanka, and this professor posed to him a question that would go on to shape his life's work. This professor asked him, how can you come here as a Black person and a representative of Christianity when we both know, he said, that Christians were slave owners for generations, and Christians today are brutalizing and denying people their rights? Are you not, this professor asked him, are you not betraying all the people of color on this earth? So what did Thurman say? He told the professor that in fact he made a great distinction between Christianity as it is practiced today and the religion of Jesus. He said to this professor, my judgment about slavery and racial prejudice relative to Christianity is far more devastating than yours could ever be. Later, Thurman offered a fuller answer to that professor in his 1949 book, Jesus and the Disinherited. Has anybody read it? Do you know about this? Okay, you got to read it. Well, you don't have to, but if you're interested, I highly recommend it. Jesus and the Disinherited. This is a book published in 1949 that Dr. King carried with him everywhere he went. In this book, Howard Thurman analyzes the religion of Jesus as a spiritual technique of survival for those who are oppressed. The religion of Jesus as a roadmap for the survival of the spirit, without which we're lost. The religion of Jesus as a technique for uprooting from your own heart the fear and deception and hatred which all oppressive systems will try to create in you. Thurman points out, Jesus himself was born into an oppressed and marginalized community. You all know this, I think. To be a Jew in the Roman Empire was very like being a Black person in Thurman's day. No rights to speak of, lives lived under the continual threat of violence. You got the message 1,000 different ways that you were worth nothing, that your life had no value. Thurman says in his book, there are few things more devastating than to have it burned into you that you do not count, and that no provisions are made for the literal protection of your person. Ouch. He says the threat of violence is ever present, and there is no way to determine precisely when it may come crushing down upon you. Can we sit with that a moment? Thurman reminds us that Jesus knew what it was to live in fear of violence. Jesus understood what it was to feel the distortions and the lies forced on you by any system that tells you you have no worth. He understood what it was to hate the people oppressing you. He understood it because that was his life. And because it was his life, he knew what it could do to your soul. And so Jesus discovered and taught a path, a way of being that was intended to preserve the inner self, to preserve the inner self from the ravages of evil all around it. And that path was love. Not collapse, not capitulation, not a reflexive violence in return, but a strong, soul-deep practice of love to protect your own spirit. And so that is why when Jesus said we have to love our enemies, we have to forgive those who persecute us, even those who take our lives, that is why he actually meant it. He literally, really meant it. And Thurman said in his book, in a subdued way, this was not an easy position for Jesus to take in his community. Not a popular stance. But as Jesus taught over and over again, practicing love is the only way to protect and sustain our inner life, without which nothing else matters. And so, when Thurman tells us, and I bet you've heard this before, these are from the chalice lighting words, but I bet you've heard this. When Thurman tells us, do what makes you come alive, because what the world needs is people who have come alive. This is what he's talking about. This is the larger lens behind those words. Aliveness of the spirit. A life that is rooted in love. A love that is full of power and strength, stronger than all the things that are resisting it. And there are a lot of things resisting it these days. So what does the world need from us? Be alive. Be someone who has come alive. I want to share one last quote from Dr. Thurman that might speak to us today. He says, the movement of the Spirit of God in the hearts of men and women often calls them to act against the spirit of their time, or causes them to anticipate a spirit which is yet in the making. Let's translate that a little bit. The movement of all that rises up in us, all that is sacred in the hearts of men and women and all people, often calls them to act against the spirit of their times, or causes them to anticipate a spirit which is yet in the making. And he concludes, in a moment of dedication, they are given wisdom and courage to dare a deed that challenges and to kindle a hope that inspires. What does the world need from us? Just that. May it be so. Amen. Blessed be.